PM, thank you for sitting with us today. You'll soon hand over to DPM Lawrence Wong, so we would like to take this opportunity to hear from you about your thoughts on how Singapore has transformed in the last 20 years, and also what kind of Singapore will the new PM be leading?
Looking forward to the handover. We've been preparing this for a very long time. Everything is ready and it will take place on the 15th of May.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with foreign policy. Foreign policy is all about keeping our little red dot safe and secure. And Singapore has had a steady foreign policy based on our national interests. But the world is changing and Singapore is also changing. So in your view, how has our foreign policy evolved? And also, what has changed and what has remained constant?
Well, both the world as well as Singapore has changed. The world, 20 years ago, we were still in a kind of post-Cold War environment, meaning the Americans were very dominant. Globalization, multilateralism, people talk about free trade, people talk about international division of labor. Thomas Friedman says the world is flat. And we were prospering in that environment. Today, the world is not flat. Today, the great powers are at odds with one another. China is playing a much more dominant role. It's become very much stronger in the last 20 years and more prosperous. There are tremendous tensions which have arisen. Russia with the US, China and EU too. And we are dealing with a very troubled world. Confidence in free trade has also been shaken. People now talk about first they talk about fair trade. That means I don't want it to be so free. Then they talk about national security considerations, which are important. Resilience. What if you become hostile to me? What if there's COVID? That's important too. Then they talk about reshoring, bringing it back home. Do it at home. But that sounds protectionist. And they talk about friend-shoring. I will do business with friends. Now, who's my friend? So it's a very troubled external environment. And we are sailing into it. Domestically, we've changed. In 20 years, we've become more prosperous. I think our diplomacy has helped us to carve a spot in the world. People recognize us. I think there's a certain respect for us. That's good. At the same time, we are very much more connected to the world. In the sense that in the old days, foreign policy is foreign policy, and what's domestic? Well, Singaporeans will leave the foreign policy to the government. But today, you're so exposed. You've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got WhatsApp, you've got TikTok. You've got people traveling, and you've got all sorts of things coming in, and Singaporeans being influenced by videos, by memes, by messages. So your foreign policy and domestic situation has been linked together. So we have to adapt to that, and our foreign policy has to adapt to that. What has not changed, we are still a little red dot, a bit redder, but still little. We are still in the middle of Southeast Asia, neighbors bigger than us, region prospering but troubled. We are still depending on an international rule of law, on international trade, on our sea lines of communications being open, being able to talk to everyone in the world and do business and get our food and our supplies, and needing to protect our interests where everybody is jostling with one another, and we are not the biggest person in the discussion. And we have to hold our own, which takes quite a lot of doing and keeps MFA very busy.
And PM, you talked about protecting our interests. I'm just wondering, when we say Singapore's national interest, it seems like different people seem to have different interpretations of it. Say during certain incidents, there'll be different segments of Singapore trying to push for the government to do this or to do that. So how do we get people on the same page? And is it time now for us to really interrogate what it means, for something to be in Singapore's national interests.
This is a continuing debate. Everybody says, and is quite obvious to accept, that your foreign policy must be based on your national interests. Then the question is, what is your national interest? And you have different ones, right? You have national interest in prospering, in safety and security, defending yourself, in being able to do business with other countries when you need to, in having sovereignty or independence to decide what you want to do. You have national interest in specific things, for example, in access to airspace so that your aeroplanes can fly, or aeroplanes can fly into Singapore and out of Singapore, or to be able to set your own path and decide whom you want to do business with and what you stand for in the world. I mean, what are your values? What are your ideals? It's not just bread and butter and can you get your food or not, but when you talk about multiracialism, democracy, talk about integrity of our system, these are things, all of them are national interests. Which one is more important? And when you debate that, it's not debating one abstract principle like sovereignty versus another abstract principle like the economy. And then you must, how do I weigh them? Which one weighs a little bit more? But a specific issue comes up. There's a test. Somebody probes your maritime boundary a little bit. On the other hand, he's offering to do business with you and trade green energy, for example. Do you get angry? Do you decide to overlook this and then I do business and I lump it? There's no formula answer. You have to look at each one, each situation, and then you have to judge. And in a big case, if you have to make a big decision and take a stand, then we have to have the people will have a view and the government will have to take that into account. And the government hopefully will have its own considered view and will talk to the population and we will discuss this. And we've done that. I mean, there have been times, for example, before I took over in 2004, you may have forgotten, but I made a trip to Taiwan as TPM. And it caused a rumpus. And I had to state my position. So my first National Day rally, I had to spend time talking about not just foreign policy, but that trip to Taiwan and why I went and why it's important to us and why Singapore's national interest required me to do that and that it was necessary for me to do so, even though it caused a kerfuffle at that time. And that's the sort of thing which happens. And during the last 20 years, heaven knows there have been other occasions when we have had incidents and occasions when we've been tested and we've had to get people to understand what it's about. Sometimes public channels, sometimes we've had to do it closed doors and then we can explain a bit more the background and what's it all about.
Yeah, in the context of how our foreign policy has evolved. So in terms of our two closest neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, how have you managed relations over the past 20 years?
I think we have been lucky. Relations with both have been generally good. With Malaysia, I've worked with a succession of PMs, starting with Abdullah Badawi, and we've had good discussions with, I met all of them, and we've made progress with them as we went along. Different issues came up. For example, with Abdullah Badawi, he was PM when the Pedra Branca judgment at the ICJ was published. And we discussed, I talked to him and we decided, yes, we will both accept this. And now we should move on and talk about the next stage, which is now the land is settled. What about the maritime borders? We talk about maritime delimitation. And so we made progress, but of course it takes time, and we are still discussing the maritime delimitation until today. Then Najib, we did settle a very important matter, which was the POA land issue, the Malayan Railways land. And we did the land swap with them, which is why today you have the rail corridor, which a lot of people enjoy on weekends. If you go cycling there, you'll know it's because we did a deal. When the old railway station at Tanjung Pagar is done up again, which is soon going to be, you enjoy that. That's part of the deal. You go to Marina South, I think it's called Marina 1, the development jointly between Khazanah and Temasek. That was part of the deal. We gave them, I made Najib a generous offer to settle. He looked at it, he agreed. We went into the joint development. I think both sides are very happy and both sides made money from the development. And there's another development too in Duo at Bugis, which was also part of it. So it was a very important issue resolved with Najib, which had taken 20 years to get there. Now it's Anwar Ibrahim. I've met him many times since a very long time ago, even back in the 90s. So we know each other very well. We've been talking about significant cooperation. The RTS link in JB going to Woodlands is coming up. It's supposed to be done by end 2026. And I think a lot of Singaporeans are anxiously waiting for that to go and get their supper and their shopping in Johor Bahru, and Johorians to come here to work. We are talking about other issues, can be cooperative, but also sensitive. Airspace, the maritime boundaries I talked about just now, water. These are things which need to be discussed. We haven't settled them, so there's work to be done by my successor. With Indonesia, I coincided with two Indonesian presidents, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Very soon after I swore in, I went to attend his swearing-in ceremony in Jakarta. I think it must have been my first or second overseas visit. And we worked with him, and we signed 3 agreements on airspace also, on military training, and on extradition. In fact, I remember vividly, we went to Bali, had all the ministers there, and we settled the agreement. But it couldn't follow through, the politics was difficult. Then when Jokowi came in, he wanted to have another stab at it, and so did I. So we decided to press the matter. I asked Teo Chee Hean to look after our side of it and negotiate. On his side, he had Menko Luhut Panjaitan in charge, together with Prabowo, because the defense part was very important. And happily, they settled it. We signed it 2 years ago. It was ratified last year, and it has come into effect this year. So it's settled. And next week, I'm going to Bogor, and I'm meeting Jokowi. I'm going to say, thank you very much. Between you and me, we settled something which is a 25-year agreement. So we're on a good basis to take our 2 countries the next step forward and cooperate together. I think both will always be complicated relationships. Nearest neighbors, permanently nearest neighbors. You have to work together, and yet there are always so many places where you can easily have different perspectives or rub up against each other. And I think if we both know that and both try our best not to collide, we can do many things together.
Okay. So would you like to share about US and China next, keeping in mind that the Taiwan Straits crisis has been a long-standing point of contention as well?
Well, as I said just now, US-China relations started off positive, and there were issues, but basically cooperative, but have now become very contentious. I remember one meeting quite early in my term where the Chinese premier was there, and I can't remember who was on the American side. Not sure it was the president, maybe the Secretary of State. And the discussion was on the US trade deficit with China. And the American official was complaining that how is it there's an imbalance and it is not fair. And the Chinese premier's response was, yes, we would like to buy more from America. Please let me buy more high-tech products from you. Supercomputers, I don't know, maybe high-tech electronic machines, whatever. And of course, it was not so easy for Americans to do that. But it was that sort of a discussion. There are issues, but we are not hostile to each other. But today, there are issues, and they are trying very hard not to be hostile to each other, but it is a very tense relationship. Better now, because after Biden met President Xi Jinping in San Francisco last year, things have stabilized, and both sides are trying not to take provocative moves, but the underlying tensions, the underlying contradiction between their national positions, national interests, I think is very deep and will be there for a long time. More than 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe more. Fortunately for us, we have good relations with both. We've had good relations with China for a long time now, despite periodic kerfuffles. We have the Suzhou project. It's now celebrating the 30th anniversary, I think this year or next year. We have the Tianjin project that celebrated its 10th anniversary. And in the last 20 years, when I was PM, we launched on a third G2G project, which is in Chongqing on connectivity. And that is doing promisingly. And we have upgraded, we have an FTA with China. We've upgraded the FTA with China. We've participated in cooperative projects which China has championed. Belt and Road, we join in the Asia Industrial and Infrastructure Bank, AIIB. So I think overall our relationships with them are very warm, and I think they know that we would like to do more with them, and we are not against them. At the same time, they know, I think, that although we are ethnic Chinese mostly, we are different from them. And that's very important. So we can maintain the proper relationship, and the relationship is based on national interests, and it can't really be based on ethnic identity or how shall we put it, inherited. You can't say we are the common ancestors, therefore we must have the same history. With the US, we also have good relations. We do a lot with them. They invest here huge amounts, important projects. Their banks are all here. With the government, we do a lot. We cooperate on defense and security. In fact, we have a lot of troops which are training in the US, flying F-15s, flying F-16s, flying Chinook helicopters. We do combined arms exercises in Fort Sill in Oklahoma. At any time, there are 1,000+ Singaporean SAF personnel in the US. We are, I think, the biggest, but certainly one of the biggest foreign contingents of military people in the US. So it's a very close relationship that direction. They come here, we host them, we welcome them, their ships visit, Navy ships visit, their aircraft visit. 2 years ago, somebody spotted a strange bird parked at Changi Airport, and it went onto the internet and asked, what is this? I think I know what this is. And it was a US Global Hawk. It was a drone, a long-range drone, which was visiting and was parked at Changi, and somebody spotted it. Both ways, it's a very rich relationship. And we would like it so because fundamentally we believe that America has an important constructive role to play in the region, because the region needs to be an open one. We are friends with multiple major powers, and we would like them to be here constructively, helping with the security and the prosperity of the region. And the Americans are doing that. And therefore, because we are their friend, when they need a favor and ask us, sometimes we are able to do that. For example, one day we received a call to say, well, President Trump wants to meet President Kim, and do you think he can do that in Singapore? And we said, when? And they said, next month. So we scrambled and we hosted it. And we are just pouring tea for the occasion. But nevertheless, it shows that both sides found us acceptable, that we are not hostile to them, and they trusted us not just on our policies, but trusted us to be able to put the thing together and to host it and make it all go off without a hitch.
PM, let's speak a little bit about that trust.
Yes.
Because over the years, as you've described, you've addressed the fact that our foreign policy has had to align with our national interests to a great degree.
Yes.
But at the same time, the way that we are perceived overseas is the role. We don't have to be necessarily on the world stage, but we go out there to achieve something for Singapore as well. It has to resonate at home.
Yes.
So we've been called a bridge between East and West. Sometimes people call us the voice of reason as far as our foreign policy is concerned, amid those hostilities that you described. What to you is the unique strength that we bring?
Well, people often say quite nice things about us. I would hesitate to adopt that and treat that as the way we describe ourselves. We are just trying to be protecting our interests, and the way to do that is to make friends and strike up relationships where we can make common cause with other countries. And therefore we have to be constructive when we go to the meeting. We have to master the issues, understand what this is about. We can be helpful in putting up ideas which can bridge different positions and move a little bit closer towards an outcome, a landing place. We're very happy to do that. We do that at many forums. In APEC, for example, when we negotiated RCEP, I think we played a very active role because it was important to us. At the UN climate change conferences, the climate change minister, currently Grace Fu, plays a very active role. And one meeting, I think at Glasgow, they put her in charge of negotiating the carbon markets subgroup, which is one of the most vexed subjects on the agenda, but she went in as an honest broker. We want the system to work, and she helped to pull the perspectives together and to reach a landing, reach an agreement. And that calls for the minister to be on top of his or her job, but it also calls for a whole Singapore team in the ministry and across the government to be able to understand the positions, to have ideas which are useful, reconcile our internal positions so that we don't have a big internal fight instead of negotiating Singapore's interests with the other party. And then we go there, we are prepared, and we talk. And I think we do have a bit of a reputation for that, and it's a good reputation. Sometimes, of course, people say, wow, we are so well prepared, I better be careful. Am I really ready to talk to you or not? So that's a bit of a hurdle we have to cross, but I think it's better to be prepared than for people to say, let's go and see them. They haven't done their homework, and we'll have a good time.
It certainly is important to do one's homework, yeah.
Sorry, PM, since we are near the handover now, do you think that people might try to test us where foreign policy is concerned, because we'll have new leaders, and of course a lot of foreign policy is also about personal relationships. And
I wouldn't be surprised. People will want to see how the new leaders are, what their policy is, and what the personality is, his standing, his strength of support at home, and his ability to engage and to hold his own and to be somebody you take seriously. I think DPM Lawrence is not completely new to this. He was my PPS a long time ago, and he went to many of these meetings with me, so he's seen me. As minister, he's traveled with me too from time to time. And on his own too, he's been making trips. He's been to America. Recently, he was in France, Germany. He met Scholz, he met Macron. And they talk to him and they get the measure of him. And in the region, he's also met the ASEAN leaders, quite a few of them. So I think that the new team will be probed, certainly, tested. Well, maybe gently, maybe issues will come and people might push a little bit harder or maybe not. But we must expect that some probing will come and we must be ready to respond. Not in a harsh way, but quietly to stand our ground and let people know that, we may have had a changing of the guard, but the new guards are prepared and the old guards are still giving, hopefully, useful views to the new team how to do it.
PM, let's move on to talking about the economy now.
Yes.
So managing the competing demands of continuing our economic growth.
Yes.
As well as having these political considerations
Yes.
Vis-a-vis foreign talent.
Yes.
And the fact that here in Singapore, there are continually anxieties among some Singaporeans about this. And government is having to reassure Singaporeans about it.
Yes.
How have you managed to approach this in a way that supported the principles that you have?
You have to we have to do our best to generate political space for us in order to feel our way forward and go as far as politically can be supported. Let me explain what I mean. I think the concerns which people have about foreigners, about dilution, about values, about social impact, these are not unreasonable concerns. Because we are a society, we are a country. It's not just a city, London, you have the whole of Great Britain. So London, you don't have to mobilize an army and go and fight. And there is a whole population which is outside of London, and London is cosmopolitan, diverse, it can have a majority of foreigners. It's still the capital of Great Britain. But Singapore, the city, is the country. So the city itself, the cohesion must be there, the sense of the values must be there, the sense of identity must be there. The way Singapore works, there's a certain way we have socialized with one another. We are Singaporeans together, as the song goes. When you bring in foreigners, that in some ways you enrich that. In many ways you enrich that. They bring talent, they bring experience, they bring a different perspective on things. But at the same time, you dilute that, at least temporarily, because they don't have the same background. You can come from China, but you're not the Singaporean Chinese. You can come from India, but you're not the Singaporean Indian. And there's a difference between a Singaporean Chinese and a Chinese Chinese, and a Singaporean Indian and an Indian Indian. And I told one foreign leader this once, and he looked at me in puzzlement. And he turned to his interpreter and said, "What is this Chinese Chinese, Indian Indian?" I don't know what his interpreter said, but I gave him a further elaboration just in case the interpreter didn't convey my meaning. But you know what I mean, and it's a real concern. On the other hand, we need the economy to grow. We need talent to develop new things in Singapore, to stand out in the world. We need, and you can never have enough talent. We need bodies, because there are jobs which there are no Singaporeans available to do, like construction. And there are also other jobs where there are Singaporeans available to do, but you won't have enough. And you need more, and if I can have 10% or 20% more engineers or technicians or healthcare workers, I can do a lot more things which I You can say, I'll be more productive, but I can't take away 10% of people and become 10% smarter and faster just on my own. So I do need the bodies. So how do I reconcile these two? If you look at a country like UAE, their answer is, well, I just bring in as many as I want. I have oil. I use the oil basically to take care of my resident population, and I run the economy, and everything is done by, practically everything is done by people who come from all over the world. But Singapore cannot run like that. So we've got to have keep on bringing in talent, keep on bringing in numbers, but in a controlled way which is good for our economy, which complements Singaporean workers and professionals rather than puts them out of a job, and at the same time which doesn't dilute my social norms and mores and the way Singapore works and cause frictions and conflict within Singapore. And you have to judge that. It's partly making sure you have enough infrastructure so you don't have, that's the physical part of it. You have a big population, where do the foreign workers go? They need entertainment on weekends. It's partly educating the people who come here that this is Singapore, please respect Singapore norms, and some things you can do in your home country, please have a care and don't do them like that here. And they may not become Singaporeans straight away, but yeah, you know that you are a guest, and well, be a good guest. On the other side, it's also on our part, getting Singaporeans to understand how important it is for them to come in, for them to be here, and being able to make accommodations and make that effort to reach out with your hands and say, welcome, I'm your neighbor, I'm a Singaporean. If you need any help, please let me know, and let me show you around. And then hopefully you won't bump into so many things as you go around Singapore and break them.
You're right, PM. The need for foreign talent is not unique to Singapore. It occurs around the world, in almost every jurisdiction. Yeah. But it is particularly acute here in Singapore. Do you think that there may ever come a time when we need to calibrate the way that we think about this, even as we keep these principles of our open economy alive?
We have been calibrating it already. I mean, you cannot go on just open your doors and anybody who wants to come can come. Millions want to come, literally, and we'll be swamped. So we have to manage it, and we've got at the low end, we've got foreign worker quotas, we've got foreign worker levies, a very complex system, and you manage by numbers. At the top end, we haven't managed by numbers, but we manage by qualifications and what sort of jobs you are doing. And so we have the employment pass mechanisms, and we adjust there's a ceiling threshold, salary threshold, and we adjust that progressively so that it's comparable to Singapore salaries, and they come in at the appropriate level. And even that is not quite enough. So last year or the year before, we introduced a compass system for EP holders. So there's a point system. What is your industry? What is your qualification? The particular company you're in, does it have a good diversification of foreign employees or not? So it's not a company where 90% of the people have come from a single source. And hopefully we will have a more diversified and more easily integrated foreign population. And therefore we can accommodate a few more. We'll have to see how it's working, how it works. It's just started, so we'll take a bit of time to know. I'm sure we'll continue refining it. But we have to keep on doing these things and adjusting as we go along. That's why I said, feel our way forward. You can't be on autopilot.
Okay, PM, moving forward, I would like to ask about the youngsters in Singapore and how can they actually build confidence that they are actually doing better than the previous generations, especially so when they are less likely to actually do upgrading
Well, I think my starting point is, as an old man, I envy the young men and women, because you are enjoying advantages and opportunities which never existed in my generation. We've built Singapore. We've built the education system. We've educated you. We've given you perspectives on the world, opportunities to travel. If you go to university, practically everybody who goes to NUS or SMU or SITD has an externship, an overseas attachment somewhere during his university course. And about 40%, 50% nearly of Singaporeans now go to our our autonomous universities, AUs. In my generation, it was like about 3-4% went to universities in Singapore. You grow up learning to swipe the iPad before you learn to speak. May not be a good thing, but you have the opportunity to be exposed to the technology, to use the technology, to connect to the world, to be more productive, and to do all kinds of jobs which my generation never heard of. Esports trainer. You can make a living. You are sitting there playing with your fingers and mouse in a super special chair with a big screen, and you can make a living. So, is that a worse life than the previous generation? I don't think so. What is true is that the previous generation came from third world to first. We took them there on the journey, started poor, progressed rapidly year by year, ended up many not poor. Most not poor, many well off, and some very, very successful. So that's an exhilarating journey. And you start off with a 3-room flat, you end up in an executive apartment, or maybe you even upgraded to private property. So this generation, you have a 4-room flat or 5-room flat, or maybe a condo. You're not starting at the same very low level, but you're starting at a higher level and a higher quality of accommodation as well as life. And can you bring it higher? Answer is yes. It won't improve as fast as before, but you came very fast from here to here, and you're not going back down, you're going up from here slower, but if we work at it, we can continue moving upwards. I think with that attitude, as a young person, I would feel, I would feel very disappointed if a young person were pessimistic about his opportunities in life and wish he had been born earlier. I wish I had been born later. You must argue you're a young person.
Well, fair enough, actually. I think I do stand with what you say.
So how do you think the government can convince young people that, instead of looking at all these financial gains, because I think a lot of the times, as you said, it's looking at other people, starting with a 3-room flat and then ending up in a bungalow, and they are thinking that that's never going to happen to me. And because of that, they almost feel like, oh, I'm not doing as well as the previous generation. How would you convince them?
Well, I think if we talk about quality of living, very many in the old generation were living 5 or 6 or 10 in a rental flat. Nobody does that today. There are many who went from rental flat to executives, some even to private property, not so few. So, can everybody make that journey from where you are now, as if you move into a new flat in Bidadari or Tengah? Probably not everybody can do that. But that's only in terms of the area of the house you live in terms of the quality of the life in your home, the amenities, the connections, the social environment in the neighborhood which we have built up, I think you can have a very high quality of life in Singapore, and comparable to, if not better than, in nearly any other major city in the world. What we don't have is what other major cities in bigger countries can do. And that is, if you are working in Manhattan in New York, maybe you can go upstate and out of Manhattan on the weekend and go to some other place with a bit more space, and then you can decompress.
Yeah.
And same if you are living in London or in Sydney. And in Singapore, well, you can't go, there's no upstate Singapore because all of Singapore is pretty developed. But our neighboring countries are not very far away, and many Singaporeans travel. That's why there are long traffic jams on the weekend on the causeway.
You don't decompress and you go through a jam.
Well, the RTS link will make things better. I'm told what people do is they expect a jam, they download their Netflix movies, and then they sit there and watch their movies waiting to clear CIQ.
Hopefully not the driver doing it. And PM, on economic well-being, since you spoke about young people, what about older people? I mean, you yourself worked way past retirement age, and Singapore is also moving towards raising retirement age. Yet anecdotally, you hear from some old people, that it's quite hard for them to find a job, or if they've lost their job at around 50, not even old yet, maybe young seniors, they're not able to find a job that easily, something that pays them well enough, or they have to maybe downgrade a little bit. So how are we going to help these people? And even as we raise retirement age, what are the opportunities actually for more mature workers?
I think it's an anxiety for many Singaporeans. Actually, statistically, your chances of working as an old person in Singapore are very good. Because if you look at our employment rates, not unemployment rates, but employment rates by age, the older workers in the 50s and the 60s, even to the late 60s, are high, are rising, and are actually good compared to many other developed economies. So many people are working well into their 60s now, and sometimes into their 70s, like me. And actually happy to have that work, because it gives you something to do, it's purposeful, it's not just earning the money, but I wake up in the morning, there's something I want to do in life. So the economy needs workers, we are short of workers, older workers are valued, and we should make the best use of them. And it is not just a numbers thing, because you also have to adapt the jobs so that older workers can do the jobs. You also have to train the workers so that as they grow older, they can do the jobs which are available for them. They may have to change careers because the industry has changed and the old job does not exist anymore, and then they have to go to a reconfigured job or even change industries. And it happens. I mean, in the finance industry, for example, you used to have bank tellers. They sit there, you come, they smile, they chop your bank book, and then you do the transaction. But now everybody's on ATMs. So what do you do with the bank tellers? And the banks have been training them by the hundreds, sometimes the thousands, to go and do other jobs and redeploy them within the system, and not just say, sorry, I don't need tellers anymore, here's a gratuity, off you go. And some of them, for example, go and become customer service officers. You need them because ATMs are good, but you want a personal touch. And if the ATM frustrates you and you press the help button, you want somebody smiling there, and not just, if you don't know how to press this button, press 2. And then you're dealing with a robotic voice, and you get very frustrated. So they are there, face comes up, smiles, says, how can I help you, as a real person, and talks you through it. So there are new jobs. But the change will continue. AI has come. Next time you see a face, maybe it's synthetic, maybe it's a real person. And then the real person will be free to do something else, and we will work very hard to make sure that he or she can do something else. We've got Skills Future, we've got Skills SG as an organization which is pursuing this nationally, so that we put a lot of effort into this and we get workers to take it seriously. And this year's budget, we had one of the small hong paos in a big budget was a $4,000 Skills Future grant, which everybody 40 and above receive and can use for some significant training course. It's not such a small amount of money, but it's a token of how seriously we take it and how much we want you to go and improve yourself and improve your opportunities.
The messaging to Singaporeans seems to have been to adopt this idea of lifelong learning.
Yes.
And to upskill. And that message is not just for the older generation, it's for the younger generation as well, for skills acquisition. During your time as Prime Minister, the idea of changing our mindsets as far as that upskilling is concerned, that has become more entrenched. How much progress do you think you've seen over the last 20 years in that regard?
Well, I think people understand it. There are a lot of schemes, there are quite a lot of programs, and many people have been making use of this. I think the unions certainly have got the message. The rank and file, it varies, but when you have a downturn, I think people feel a cold shiver and they take fright and take it more seriously. When conditions improve and things look better, the fear is a bit less and maybe they relax a little bit. But I think with things changing so fast, we can't afford to relax, so we have to push hard. One of the things the unions did in Chi Meng's initiative as SecGen a couple of years ago was to start introducing CTCs, company training committees, in companies, so that the company works with the union or the worker representatives to discuss what is the upgrading which will be useful to the company and how to adapt the jobs, and you can work together to keep on making this training and upgrading be productive. Because it's quite easy for you to go for a course and then you get a piece of paper and the paper doesn't really, may or may not help you in your job. And that's not what we want. So with the CTCs, we thought it was a good idea. The government backed it with some support, financial support, I think $100 million. And it's been going very well. I think the companies are getting the spirit of it now. They've seen it work in other firms, and so they're prepared to do it. And I met some unionists recently before May Day, preparing for May Day, and one of them told me, the scheme is working very well. We're using up the government grant. Can you help us a little bit more? So I said, well, if you can get it to work, the money is not the problem. The challenge is to get the mindset change and the training executed and the workers' jobs and livelihoods protected and enhanced. And I think we are doing that.
PM, have you had a chance to use your Skills Future credits? Or?
Not yet. One day I will do that. I will go on a photography course, or maybe I will go on a course how to appear on TV and be interviewed and look relaxed.
It's good to research, at least. Just research some of the opportunities out there. There's so many. It's mind-boggling, actually.
No, there are many. Yeah. And I think there are people who will go and attend a course and they decide they like it, and then they go deeper into it, and then they turn into a photographer or a videographer. Some of them turn into social influencers. That's another career which never existed before.
Indeed, that's what one of my daughters is actually working as a social media, in social media management.
Some of them are very successful.
I would have never imagined. So just to wrap up on this discussion about the economy, PM, can we just talk a little bit about the fact that you've been such a vocal advocate for globalization? The headlines keep telling us the world is becoming more fragmented economically, that globalization is a bad word now. You've said you don't believe that is so. Singapore still needs to stay open. It still needs to have those multilateral rules-based trade relations with various quarters, as many as there are. But we are seeing these sort of networks starting to evolve, right? Smaller sort of groupings evolve. Can we still stay relevant in that environment?
We have to. We have no choice. I mean, other people can say reshoring. What do I reshore to Singapore? I'm making chips for the world. And if I make all the chips here, first of all, I need the components and all the supporting industries, which I don't have. Secondly, if I make 1 million chips a month, who's going to use them in Singapore? It doesn't make sense. And if I'm going to reshore and feed myself, well, I need have resilience requirements, and we have an ambition to say 30 by 30. 30% of the nutrition is generated in Singapore by 2030. Maybe I can make 30 by 30, but if you want 100 by 30, what am I going to eat? I'll be back to planting ubi kayu. Tapioca, which is what people did during the war. So it's not possible. So we have to be out there promoting freer trade, promoting cooperation, willingness to be interdependent, willingness to develop the networks of trade and investment and trust and finance to work together. We used to do it on a multilateral scale. At WTO, we were very active. WTO negotiations have 100 plus countries, now nearly 200. And you can't really discuss with all 100 plus participating in a conversation, so you form groups, and one of the key groups used to be called the Green Room when I was Trade Minister long ago. And the Green Room had maybe 20, 30 countries. There was no particular reason Singapore would have been entitled to be there, but because our representatives were active and we pushed, and people found us valuable to help the conversation, so we were able to be there and participate in the Green Room discussions and shape, or at least help to shape the outcomes of the discussions. WTO is now paralyzed because various countries really are doing that. Many countries are all doing their own thing. Everybody pays lip service, and then they honor it in the default. And that's very sad. We have to work in other forums, and they are smaller forums, but we will work them. We have the TPP, we were very active. And in the end, we nearly got it all the way there to the finish line. Then the Americans couldn't participate, opted out, but the Japanese, under Prime Minister Abe, rallied the rest of us, and 11 countries got it over. We got the CPTPP. It's a great achievement. Remember, that started as the P4, which Singapore was part of, because the P4 was Singapore, New Zealand, Chile, Brunei. And we started this little FTA, very little or relatively little trade between us, and so far away on different corners of the world. But we had a dream. One day others will join in and it'll grow into something substantial. And that was a nucleus around which eventually CPTPP came. So there are things like that which we can do. We are doing that in new fields. For example, the e-economy. You're talking about data, you're talking about e-commerce, you're talking about rules for data storage, for sharing information, governance, data security. And so you need a new age kind of agreement. And we've got we concluded digital economy agreements. We have one with Britain, we have one with Australia, we have a multilateral one, which we call the DEPA, Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, with New Zealand, with Chile, 3 of us. And there's a queue to come in, and 1 or 2 countries which are quite advanced in their queue and will be joining soon. So I think we have to keep on being active, smaller scale platforms, but to us, these are all the more important.
PM, you spoke about being helpful and constructive in our foreign policy. How about in the context of ASEAN?
That's very important. ASEAN is the raft which we are connected to, which gives us a platform in many bigger forums. It's got 10 members, including us. Timor-Leste is applying to join. It's really a cornerstone of Singapore's foreign policy. It works by consensus. We have a wide range of cooperation. Every year they have, 600-700 meetings of different kinds, big and small. The leaders meet twice a year, sometimes once, but very intensively. And the habit of working together, I think, has been very valuable in getting us to understand each other's, what is possible for each other and where we can make common cause. Because it's consensus, the progress is often not as quick as we'd like, but it's a very important platform for cooperation and also for wider cooperation with the wider region. Because there are ASEAN forums with our partner countries, America, China, Japan, Russia, India, Australia, so many of them. And in different forums, you have the East Asia Summit, you have the ASEAN +3, you have the ASEAN +1s. Every time we have a ASEAN Summit, summit is in plural because there are so many of them. And it takes a lot of energy and time, but it's necessary diplomacy, and it's what we call in the jargon ASEAN centrality. Meaning not really that ASEAN is the center controlling everything, but ASEAN is a center which provides a platform where many regional discussions can take place on economy, on security, on the climate even, international cooperation. And with that base, I think we make a contribution to people meeting one another, discussing matters, and hopefully to easing tensions which come up. ASEAN benefits from a stable, secure region, and ASEAN, I think, helps contribute to a stable and secure region. And that's very important because it's key to Singapore, especially as a small country. And it's something which we have enjoyed now for 30, 40 years. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. The Cambodian War ended, was about 1990, is 30 years ago. And since then, and even during a lot of that period, for most people in the region, life could carry on and you have peace and trade and investments and prosperity. And you can plan your life and move forward. Now, if you go forward 20 years or 30 years and ask yourself, can we be sure that for the next 20, 30 years, we will have as stable a region, as secure a region, as conflict-free a region? Knowing that there are tensions between the big powers, knowing that rivalries are resulting in economic bifurcation, technological bifurcation, knowing the troubles and the tensions in other parts of the world which have an impact in our part of the world too. Are we absolutely sure that for the next 20 years there will be no war? And I think the answer is we can't be absolutely sure. It could happen, probably not, but things can go wrong. You could have an incident which escalates. You could have a miscalculation. People make a move thinking that the other side won't react, the other side reacts. The first party says, I have to react to the reaction, and then suddenly you find yourself in a new and unintended and dangerous situation. And on a 20-year time frame, that's completely possible. And I think on that time frame, countries have to secure their own security, their own resilience. But as the old President Suharto of Indonesia used to say, regional resilience is as important as national resilience. And regional resilience for Southeast Asia means ASEAN. So we have to keep on building this up, contributing to it, and playing our part, even though we are a very small member of ASEAN.
But PM, how do we manage Myanmar and its impact on ASEAN?
Well, Myanmar is a problem. Myanmar is an old problem. It first became a problem in 1990 when they had the coup. And the military junta, the SL SLOC, they call it, State Law and Order our Commission, took over. And basically, internationally, they went into the doghouse. And ASEAN had to deal with that. And how do you deal with that? Well, we decided at that time that we would deal with it by engaging them and encouraging them to move towards democracy. It was patient work. It took a very long time. Finally, they held elections, was it 2010. So 1990 to 2010 is 20 years of patient work, because it's another country. It's their domestic politics, their domestic tensions and conflicts and difficulties and social conditions. And you can't go and solve it for them. And even if you decided to go and be there and make it happen, you can't make it happen. Because if you were there, you would face the same difficulties. And so, happily, 2010, something was worked, elections were held, then Aung San Suu Kyi. They were respectable again, and we did business together as full members of ASEAN. It worked for some time, and after a few years, in 2021, there were new elections, and then the election outcome was not acceptable, and there was a coup, and we now have a problem again. So what do we do with that? This time, we've said, well, you remain a member of ASEAN, but at the political level, really, it's best if you don't participate, because you don't have a government which is recognized by all of the ASEAN countries. If your civil servants want to attend, if officials want to come, that's okay, but not your, really what we would call your military leaders, because we don't recognize them as government leaders. So, therefore, ASEAN has been able to carry on. We meet as ASEAN, always with one empty chair and a Myanmar flag down there. Well, it's a form which has enabled us to continue to do business and to continue to meet our partners, Europeans, the Japanese, the Americans, and not be held back by problems in Myanmar. Meanwhile, we are trying to engage Myanmar, and we've got special, the ministers form special little groups and go and visit the parties in Myanmar. And ASEAN settled on a formulation for its approach to Myanmar, which we call the 5-point consensus. And so there is diplomacy to try and nudge things in Myanmar to go in the right direction. But I think looking at the history and understanding the nature of the problem, I think we have to be patient. But fortunately, ASEAN is not held back, so that's a matter which is being dealt with. But to put it in context, Myanmar is an issue for ASEAN to manage, but really for the long term, what is important for the region is war and peace, and what can ASEAN do to contribute to peace in the region.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So we'll move on to the next topic now, which is on social safety nets, PM. So one important policy that you introduced some years ago was the idea of generational safety nets, beginning with the Pioneer Generation Package, and then we had the Merdeka, and then the Majulah packages for the young seniors amongst us, some of us, who may not have built up enough savings. When my father received notification of his Pioneer Generation Package, the letter, he held it up to me, And he said, "See, Dawn, Prime Minister hasn't forgotten us old-timers." It was important to that generation. Why has uplifting entire generations of Singaporeans like this been so important to you?
They brought us here. If they hadn't stood and fought at the critical moment, and then slogged and built their whole lives to take Singapore forward, and saved and enabled the next generation to move higher and further than they did, we wouldn't be here today. I mean, every generation does this for the next generation, hopefully wants to do this. But I think for the pioneer generation and the Merdeka generation, it was exceptional. Exceptional in the challenges they faced and the courage which they showed, and I think in the privations they experienced, because they came from poverty and nothing to a level which you would say, well, much more prosperous than before, but a long journey to go yet. And over their lifetimes, what they earned, what they saved, is much less than what the younger generations are earning and saving. That's why just now when you asked me about younger generations feeling hard done by, I said, I think that's not true. We have worked very hard to enable the younger generations to do better than us. And therefore, I think we owe it to them, now that we are not poor, now that we have accumulated some surpluses and some buffer, to be able to say, thank you very much, we honor you, here's a gesture which we hope will be helpful to you in your golden years. The pioneer generation, especially so, the Merdeka generation, different package. The Madula package is slightly different because by the time we reach the young seniors, I think they would have provided quite a lot been able to provide quite a lot for their own old age and retirement, because our CPF rates were higher and they would have had good CPF contributions during the years of working. But we know that amongst that generation there will be some who don't have enough, and also quite a few who are sandwiched, in the sense that their parents are now old and need care and support, and their kids are still dependent on them, maybe still in school or university or poly, and so with fairly heavy burdens. And so we felt that a Madula package would be appropriate, and I think will be appreciated. It's an indication that we understand that they're carrying a heavy burden, and this is, we hope, something which will be helpful to you. And fortunately, we could afford it, and so we have done it.
PM, the ethos of self-reliance has long been an important political philosophy in Singapore. It's been important for Singaporeans to remember that idea, or the pursuit of self-reliance at least. And it doesn't matter what part of Singapore's history you really look at, or what economic circumstances we've been through.
Yes.
But you said in a speech in 2004 that, and I'm going to quote you, "More money is not always the solution and can sometimes create other problems as well." What is there to stop us from sort of moving towards a welfare state as we pursue what we want, which is an inclusive society?
Well, we have some restraints and we don't have some restraints. The restraint is, if you don't have the money, you can't do it. You may want it, you may think it's good, but if you don't have the money, you can't do it. And if you become a welfare state like the Europeans, you're talking about spending maybe 45% of the GDP by the government on your behalf, and the government taxes and raises maybe 40% of GDP from people. So from the first dollar you earn, you pay 20, 30 cents, and then therefore you can afford the healthcare, the pensions, the unemployment benefits, and so on. In Singapore, we don't collect 40% of taxes in GDP, we don't spend 5% of GDP on social and other government programs. We collect 15% of GDP in tax. So, and we spend maybe 18, 19% of GDP in total government spending. So it's a totally different scale. People say, oh, GST is so high, but actually the taxes in Singapore are very low compared to other countries. Our GST went up recently. In the developed countries, were welfare states, you're talking about 20, 25% of GDP. Plus many other taxes, income, on wealth sometimes, on petrol, diesel, all sorts of things. Because otherwise, how can you afford it? So for us, the constraint is, if you can't afford it, and if you are not prepared to pay for it, then we can't have it. If you are prepared to pay for it, and you think that benefits need to be enhanced, I mean, the payouts are not enough, or the coverage needs to be improved, these are things which you do have to adjust from time to time. We have to do them, but we have to afford them. And that means if we have to raise revenues in order to pay for them and raise taxes once in a while, we have to do that. Which was the reason why the GST had to go up. It had to go from 7 to 9. And the reason is because of healthcare. Healthcare expenditure is going up steadily, sharply, predictably, and unavoidably, and I have to afford that, and I have to pay for that. The opposition will tell you, just take a bit more from the reserves, you won't go broke, and you won't feel bad about raiding the bank. But you look at the scale of it. If you want to go for a welfare state and you raid the reserves from 18% of GDP spending now to what the welfare state spends, double that or more than that, I think the reserves, however ample, will be gone very soon, and that won't do. So basically, we have to be able to afford it and spend it. Secondly, the other issue, the other thing we don't have by way of restraint is we don't have a political constituency which says, I don't want so much revenue. I don't want so much welfare. I don't want so much taxes. I want lower taxes, less welfare. Like the Republican Party in America, like the Conservatives in Britain. We have no such constituency in Singapore. There's no such party in Singapore. That's not the PAP's policy. It is no opposition party's policy. Why? Because in Singapore, if you want to form the government, you have no hope of forming a government saying less taxes, less welfare. Because we've made the country equal, we've made the constituencies all mixed, and the majority of Singaporeans are Singaporeans who are both paying taxes and enjoying the benefits. And really, they are in the income groups which will say, give me a bit more benefits, but don't tax me some more. So the pressure is to push the benefits up, to push towards more generous social safety nets, and at risk of going to too much excess, and then we dull the incentive to work, and then we have a problem also with paying for it. So I hope, what does that mean? That means in the absence of a political restraint from a conservative type party, the government has to be the one to be the gatekeeper and the balancer, and has to judge what is this we must spend, what is it which we need to do, which social safety nets are necessary, how far should we go before we draw the line. What can we afford, and what would be wise from the point of view of balancing between incentives and incentive to achieve and safety in case you fall upon hard times. And that's the government's job. And over the last 20 years, we've actually moved very far towards better social safety nets. We created ComCare to bring all our schemes together, to enhance the schemes and focus them better. We did workfare for lower income workers. We did the progressive wage, again for lower income workers, so that it's not just topping up to a certain level, but you have job progression and wage progression. We've enhanced protections for MediShield Life, for medical insurance, so that you can afford your hospital bills, for CPF Life, for old age, so that you have money for retirement, for CareShield Life, in case as you grow older and gradually become less able to look after yourself, you are long-term needing care, and well, you're not in the hospital, but you need some support, you have CareShield Life. So these are all things which we have done all within the last 20 years. It's very considerable. Of course, people will always say, please do more. And we will keep on improving.
And PM, you know, as you said, nobody will say less taxes, less welfare, but there are some people who are saying maybe less taxes or keep the taxes but more welfare.
That's
and
right.
For example, after the Pioneer package, Pioneer Generation package was launched, you know, people started speculating, is there going to be another package? And at subsequent NDRs, people are always hoping for a Majula package, a Merdeka package, and indeed there were other packages. So how would you resist the pressure maybe to, you know, have more and more packages, because maybe people will have that kind of expectations, and also will we be able to afford it if?
Well, it depends. It depends.
Yes.
And I think the attitude should be, we work hard, we are prudent. If things turn out well, and we have a good year, everybody can enjoy the upside. And we try to make the upside not just a distribution of a dividend, which is you spend the money, is gone, but something meaningful which addresses not just somebody's real need, but something which as a society we feel this is a group which deserves our recognition and support. And from time to time, I hope we'll be able to do well enough to have that, to be in that situation, and to have the Prime Minister deliver good news at the National Day rally, and the Finance Minister have a happy budget. But you have to work at it, and if you say, I want happy NDRs and budgets every year for the next 10 years, well, that's not the way the world works.
For the last 20 years as Prime Minister, Mr. Lee, you have kept your ear to the ground trying to foster this inclusivity, trying to convey to every Singaporean possible that they're heard. Maybe not addressing every single issue immediately, but that they are heard. At the same time, you've striven to keep Singaporeans united, and you've had to deal with a number of issues in that regard, with the S377A issue, with the wearing of tudung issue as well. Do you think after 20 years that Singaporeans have been able to foster, to grow a stronger Singaporean identity?
I have no doubt the identity is stronger. It's 20 more years of nation building, it's 20 more years of ups and downs and trials and tribulations and joys and sorrows. Before me was SARS, we had COVID. Before me we had the Asian financial crisis, then we had the GFC, then we've had other economic problems from time to time. In 2015, Ms. Lee Kuan Yew died. It was an enormous outpouring of emotions, and I think of a shared experience and bonding. And there have been other issues we have been dealing with too during these 20 years, like 377A, like the tudung issue, which in the way we dealt with it enable us to understand each other better and to accept each other's differences and respect each other and work out practical arrangements for that. Another very important issue which we dealt with, which was also sensitive and could easily have caused a very big problem, was the JI group after 9/11, because terrible terrorist attacks had taken place. They took place, New York was far away, but they took place in our region, in Bali, in Jakarta, subsequently. And how do we react? We are multiracial, we have Muslims, we have non-Muslims. Do we trust each other or not? Will we have an incident here or not? How do we prevent people from being led astray and become radicalized and then become a danger to Singaporeans. So we worked very hard at that. Mr. Goh Chok Tong started it because 9/11 was on his watch. And then I carried on afterwards, worked with the Malay Muslim community, worked with the Asatizas, particularly RRG, Ustaz Ali and Ustaz Hasbi chairing them. Worked with the community groups, talked to them, had sessions with them, had mixed sessions with everybody together to talk openly about what we fear will happen and why and how we must not fear one another. And after all that, we came through. We were fortunate. We have not had any terrorist attack in Singapore so far. I mean, several were aborted by our security agencies. But it could have happened easily. It didn't. But I think going through that experience has helped to bring us closer together. But to say, after this, we can fly solo. The government doesn't need to, can take hands off the steering wheel or the controls and it will look after itself. I don't think so. Never. It's not possible. Because these issues are forever sensitive ones, and you need to have limits to the discussion. You need to have the tone set by the government. And if we are going to have to make a major move, for example, on tudong for nurses or decriminalizing male homosexuality, if the government doesn't make it, it's not going to happen, or it is going to happen in a very chaotic and very contentious way. It's like in America, the government doesn't legislate, the federal government doesn't legislate, is unable to legislate on abortion legislation. So it's the result. What came about was Roe versus Wade, which was really a political judgment by a Supreme Court, a judicial body. And it's a political issue rather than a judicial issue. And it's being fought out again 40 years, 50 years after Roe versus Wade in the political arena, in all of the states and again in the federal government and in the presidential elections. So I think that it's better for the government to guide it, allow more discussions, allow freer exchange of views, and you can allow more liberal practices too, but I think we have to handle this with very great care. Always.
Yeah, just a follow-up to that. You've been able to communicate with the Malay Muslim community on a lot of sensitive issues, getting the support, the trust. What's your sense about with the trust with the 4G leaders, DPM Wong, and what would be your advice to them in terms of approaching sensitive issues with the community?
I think both sides are working at it. I see DPM Wong has been attending many iftars, buka puasas over the Ramadan recently. And it's not just that, because he's been meeting the community leaders, the religious leaders, the MPs, and PEP ground, Malay activists. All this will be part of the work of developing that relationship and mutual confidence and trust, understanding each other, where you stand, what you can say yes to, what you can ask for, but the government will probably be unable to agree to. And it will take time to build up, but I'm sure they'll be able to do it.
And following up on all the issues you spoke earlier about Tudong, about 377A, about terrorism, Jemaah Islamiyah, which is the most difficult and sensitive topic you have to approach? I
think Jemaah Islamiyah is the terrorism threat was a long-standing one. So if you ask about difficulty to handle, that was one where for more than a decade, and even for 2 decades, you had to keep on watching it and worry whether something may suddenly go bang and then you're in serious trouble, or you have a crisis to handle to prevent serious trouble. So that's a continuing challenge over 20 years. The other issues like Tudong, we handle over a long period of time, or 377A, long period of time. We had talked about it since way before I became PM. And but we could discuss it, and it was something where we had confidence that the community had a moderate view, understood the government's, accepted the government's perspective, and was prepared to work with the government and give us time to manage the issue without polarizing and hardening opinions. And I think that was a tremendous help and enabled us finally, when the time was ripe, to deal with them and to have a good resolution. But I think the most difficult one, which is going to be a long-term challenge again, is what Dawn talked about earlier, and that is managing the inherent tensions between wanting social cohesion among Singaporeans and being open and bringing in immigrants and foreign workforce, and managing that and making people feel comfortable and not feel threatened or having social tensions build up. And that is something which is going to be very difficult to manage, because we don't have a lot of maneuvering room on the downside. You can't say, I send off all the foreign workers and then tomorrow we'll be okay. Every now and again we have a debate in Parliament, and the opposition goes strumet drang and says, why so many? And we say, well, do you want to cut it all off and let all the SMEs have no foreign worker quota? And say, no, we don't mean that. We feel for SMEs too. Well, if you do, and you feel for not just the SME employer, but the SME Singaporean worker, and the Singaporeans working for MNCs, and the Singaporeans whose jobs are in companies where without the foreign worker, the company wouldn't be here. And if you want Singapore to grow, then we have no choice but to work very hard to find ways we can have our cake and eat most of it. And that's a continuing long-term challenge.
Yeah, we can talk a bit more about the Malay Muslim community.
Yes.
You worked closely with the community for 20 years.
Longer.
Yes, of course. As Prime Minister for 20 years.
Yeah.
Where do you think community has done well, and perhaps where we could have done better?
Well, where you have done well is the things which we talked about. Our national cohesion, our social cohesion, our unity is stronger today in large part because the Malay community has played its part and has helped us to manage issues and bring everyone closer together and not become further apart. If you look at the progress in the traditional indicators, proportion going to post-secondary education, you are now 80% of the Malay students go on to post-secondary education. If you look at university participation for young adults, that means 20 to 30-ish, you're talking about 20% of that cohort having having graduated from university. It's improved a lot over the last 20 years. And I think it will continue to improve, because with each generation, you've gone to school, you completed poly, you know how to make this journey, and you are better able to take care of your kids and encourage your kids to do the same as you and go further than you. So I fully expect this to improve. And you can see it in the workforce. Proportions of PMETs has gone up who are Malay. And it's quite common, you see a Malay engineer, Malay lawyer, Malay doctor, and everybody thinks it's quite normal and treats them completely equally because they're equal and up to par and same standard as everybody else. That's how our system works. So I think that these are wins which happen quietly year by year, bit by bit, and you may not notice it, but I think we should be proud of it. You still have issues with incarceration rates, you still have issues with drug rates, drug abuse numbers, you still have issues with dysfunctional families. We are working on them with Comlink Plus, with Mendaki has all kinds of programs. And I think the willingness of the professional, successful Malays to come back and contribute has been sustained. In Mendaki, certainly, you look at the other groups like AMP, they have been able to keep going and build up their programs. AMP is now existing, I don't know, about 30 years. not quite, but more than about 25 years at least. So these are achievements, and these are reasons to hope that we will continue to make progress.
Yeah, there's also issues beyond our shores. For example, the Israel-Gaza
Yes.
issue. Views from outside has an impact on the community. So
Yeah.
what are your views on this?
It's a reality of our society. It's what I talked about right at the beginning, that compared to 20 or 30 years ago, compared to before, when the outside could be far away, today the outside is on your doorstep. In a previous generation, if there's war in the Middle East, it's war in the Middle East. We really don't know much about it. You may read in the Berita Harian some reports, but really you don't get the feel, you don't get the smell of the fear and the anger and the passion which is there. But today you see it. You see it on TikTok, you see it on your WhatsApp groups, you see it, people discussing it with one another. You see it also when you get a clip come your way and you don't know whether this came from Gaza or from Chechnya, or maybe it came from somewhere else altogether, nothing to do with it. But you send it to your friends and then everybody gets worked up. So it's a reality, it's the way the world is, it's the way our own society is. I completely understand how Muslims in Singapore have become very aroused by what's happening in Gaza, very distressed. It's unconscionable, it's inhuman, it really, what can you do about that? And you feel for it because first you're a fellow human being like everybody else, but also there's a religious element to this feeling because the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not about religion, but the religion is an element. I mean, you talk about Al-Aqsa Mosque, Jerusalem, and here there is a religious identification. So the Muslims feel much more strongly about this, generally speaking, than the non-Muslims in Singapore. I think others too, young Singaporeans, they are worked up, but I would say if you are Muslim, that's an extra factor which makes sure you are very, very engaged. And I think we have to recognize that, respect that, understand it, and try to get people to work together so see what can we do to acknowledge these feelings, but to do which is practical and not just performative. You know, I can strike pose, say this, do that, have a demonstration, burn flags. It's cathartic, but does it help people who desperately need help? What will help? You raise donations. I think that makes a difference. We've raised donations generously. The community has contributed. We arrange the donations. I mean, Singapore Red Cross went to Egypt to help to deliver. I think they went to El Arish in Sinai, where the base is. We went further. We decided that we would make a donation. The government would donate. We would make another collection because there had been, or rather, the donations had been enough. We collected and purchased more appropriate food, medical necessities, and so on, and we delivered it to the Middle East and actually airdropped it on an RSAF C-130, flying from Jordan over Gaza, and we dropped the food and the parcels to the population there, and hopefully help them with their urgent needs, but also show that they got friends. So I think these are practical things you can do. To take a stand, to state what we approve of, disapprove of, we have to do that. So we have taken a stand first at the UN, where we voted for the ceasefire resolutions at the General Assembly repeatedly. Secondly, parliamentary statements and government statements, and make clear what we stand for, what we approve of, what we condemn. And we stand for peace in the Middle East. We stand for humane treatment. We condemn terrorist attacks including October the 7th, which was unconscionable and abhorrent. We also do not approve of what has happened, and we reject the actions which are taking place in Gaza, the hardship and the misery and the destruction and the innocent deaths of so many people, women and children and old people, from Israeli retaliation in Gaza. That the Israelis have to hit back, that they have to protect themselves and to hit at Hamas, I think they are entitled to do that. But the degree of damage and destruction and civilian casualties and collateral damage, I think that's, whatever the legalities from a humanitarian point of view, that must stop. And we've made that view quite clear, and I think that's a right thing for us to do. And I hope that Singaporeans, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, will understand that, and will also understand the need for us to stay together and to look at it as Singapore, as a national position which the government has to take, even though we will each have different personal attitudes. Which was the reason why MOE, Ministry of Education, embarked on the CCE class in schools to try and, not to educate people on the Middle East, that's too ambitious a project. It'll take you a master's course to understand that. But at least to understand that something very dramatic and drastic and tragic is happening there, and that we have different feelings about it amongst us, and how do we understand that, process that. I think that was essential.
Actually, on a lighter note,
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
if people were to ask me how would you best describe Singapore using a dish, I would say we are like Rojak. We have the best of everything, totally, like, truly we are a melting pot of so many different cultures, and I take pride in that as a Singaporean Indian. So now that you have touched on the Malay-Muslim community, I would like to ask you, how do you think the Indian community has evolved over the past few years, and what are some challenges and gaps that have to be addressed?
Well, the Indian community, I think, has been doing well too, in the sense that you have, not that you don't have issues, because, I mean, like every other community, you have a certain group who are having family issues and kids growing up not quite right, who need to be helped. But you have got Sinda, and Sinda has, I think, done a very good job. It's smaller than Mendaki, but you've got some very active volunteers, passionate volunteers, some Singaporeans, some immigrants, some not even citizens, but just families working here, some kids, teens, who are working with families who need help, who go and do reading with them, who mentor them, and who guide them, and I think it makes a big difference. You will have to keep on doing this, because these are problems which will not easily disappear, but you are doing the right thing. You do have one issue which I talked about a couple of National Day rallies ago, which is that between Indians who are Singaporeans and newly arrived Indians, sometimes naturalized, sometimes not. You're not the same, and therefore you have to find ways to bridge that gap with each other. And that is something which is continuing work. We have tried hard to do it, to talk to the new arrivals. This is Singapore, it's not the same as a city in India, we welcome you, but please know how things operate down here in Singapore, in our temples, in our multiracial interactions. And at the same time talking to Singaporeans so that they can understand why there is an inflow and how to think about it. But that is an issue which, I mean, other Singaporeans also notice an influx because the numbers are not small, but they are talented people and they are very valuable to us, and I think we should welcome them and as we manage the flow. It so happens that, I mean, people talk about top institutions in India, IIT, IIM, the Indian Institute of Technology and the Indian Institute of Management. If you can get into one of them, it's like getting into MIT or Stanford or Harvard. And we have the biggest concentration of IIT and IIM graduates in the world outside of India. They are in Singapore. And they have an association or two, or maybe two associations, and from time to time they have functions. I think that's good, because it adds something to us. We generate our own talent, but if I can get such a pool, come here, work here, it's a tremendous plus for us.
And PM, just now you mentioned, now we have the outside at our doorstep. And sometimes maybe the outside tries to cross the boundary. As a very small country that's very open, we can sometimes be an attractive target for people who want to try to influence the population, and this also affects our unity. So Singapore has passed the Foreign Interference and Countermeasures Act, and in fact we designated the first person as a politically significant person already. So I'm wondering, maybe you can elaborate more about your views on these measures, and also what does it really mean to be a politically significant person?
That we are open is more so now, but to some extent has always been so for quite a long time, because we're so small, that there are people outside who want to influence us, sometimes for the better, sometimes for their own purposes, is also not a new thing. We have known black operations for a long time in Singapore. In the 1960s, 1970s, some were in the newspapers, meaning not reported in the newspapers, but operating in the newspapers. And Eastern Sun, Singapore Herald, Chinese newspapers had their own cases too. So black ops are by foreign players, and some of them use political individuals, people in opposition politicians in Singapore to spout their messages and to try and influence Singaporeans in those days. So that there are outside powers or actors wanting to influence us is nothing new. But what is new is that they are now on our doorstep and in our bedroom because of the internet, because of social media, because of Singaporeans traveling, and now also because of AI. Is so much easier to generate stuff and to persuade people or mislead people. So what do we do? And we've passed this Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, FICA, as one of the ways which we are dealing with hostile influence operations, and also operations to use individuals and organizations here for their purposes. So what's the difference? Hostile influence operation means you get all kinds of messages on the social media. Looks like it's viral, but actually it's the same virus which has been distributed into 1,000 different monikers. But hostile influence of persons, is really, I use you, and then you have been either willingly or for some reason are willing to speak up and to speak on behalf of the foreign actor. And the organization is willing to speak or act on behalf of the foreign actor and participate in politics and thereby influence what's happening in the country. And I think that's improper, that's dangerous, and that's also not hard to do. So what do we do about it? And what FICA has done about it is to say, I will call you a politically significant person, PSP. It's not a political party's name, it's a political significant person. What does it mean? It means you either have a nexus to Singapore politics, I mean you're politically active or you're supporting some political party, or you have a nexus to some foreign actor. So if you have a nexus to some foreign actor, you may not be politically active, but you could become politically active and become a player in a problem. If you are a political actor, but you politically significant, he's not just an innocent third-party advocate who believes deeply in what he says and is putting that view forth, but possibly you must know what his connections are. Secondly, it makes it harder for some foreign actor to influence him, because if you put him onto your distinguished advisory committee, he has to declare it, and that diminishes his value to you. Thirdly, if he doesn't have any connections, it enables him to declare and see, I don't have any connections, you can trust me, I am a politically significant person, but I am not doing anything wrong. So in that way, we manage the problem. So who are PSPs? I'm a PSP because I'm the PM, and therefore nexus to Singapore politics, quite clear. My ministers are PSPs. My MPs are PSPs. The opposition MPs, even the NMPs, they are also PSPs, automatically, not designated, but they are also PSPs. The People's Action Party, as a party, that is a PSP too, because the party can be subverted. And every year the party has to declare, I'm not receiving foreign money, I don't have foreign connections, and if you declare falsely, then of course many consequences will follow. So that is the reason why we have a mechanism to declare, to define PSPs, to declare somebody to be a PSP, and therefore try and keep our system safer. So being declared a PSP doesn't mean necessarily that you have done anything wrong. It's just to put everybody on notice that you have either a foreign nexus or you're politically active.
Is there a difference between being gazetted a PSP and being declared a PSP? Or?
No, sorry. The ministers, the PM and so on, we don't have to be gazetted or declared. Gazetting and declaring are the same thing. The ministers and so on, we are PSPs automatically. Because you're occupying that position, you are a PSP. I think the PAP as a party, likewise, you are a party, you are a political party, you are by definition politically sensitive. If you are another organization, you could be a trade union, for example, you could be politically active because you can support one party or another. You're entitled to. But you're not automatically gazetted, you're not automatically declared under the law to be a PSP. You could be gazetted. So gazetting makes you a PSP. Once you are one, it doesn't matter how you became one.
So does that mean then that the PAP and the other political parties would then have to declare their links or connections every year under this law?
And every MP and every minister.
Okay.
And we have to do that from now onwards.
What about all these, there are a lot of businessmen maybe who have dealings with China and all that, and maybe for their own economic interests, they are always pushing for certain things and, certain actions to be taken. Would that put them in danger of becoming PSPs because they will surely have links and...
Well, you have to, that will be a matter of judgment and a decision which the Home MHA will have to make. Not everybody who does business in China is of interest, not everybody who speaks well of a foreign country is necessarily a foreign agent, or is likely to be a foreign agent, or is likely to have influence. So to be a PSP, you have to cross a certain threshold that you are likely to matter, and therefore we will do something about it.
Do you foresee more people being gazetted?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you, Pian.
Yeah.
Pian, we can talk a bit about racism. The minorities have come a long way past 2 decades and beyond, but racism still exists. Do you ever see it being eradicated, or what are your views on this?
I think it is less in Singapore than most other countries. We will work to make it better. I think to make it completely disappear, I think would be very difficult. We started off with a founding ideal to be one people regardless of race, language, or religion. And actually we've gone very far in that direction by policies, by government indoctrination even, by the way we have built our society to make it one people regardless of race, language, and religion, and to treat everybody equally at work, at social occasions, in the way we interact with one another, full opportunities and equal treatment. But to make how shall we say, to make prejudice disappear completely between different human groups who are going to remain different and keep our cultures, our heritages, and our religions, which are not the same. I think to remove altogether any sense of that difference, this distinctiveness, I think that will be very hard. So I think that we will improve. We will do more things to nudge this in the right direction. For example, the workplace discrimination legislation, which we are working on. And I think that will make a difference. But ultimately, I don't believe that you can make this completely disappear, and we have to know what to do when we fall short of perfection and something happens. So once in a while you have somebody say something outrageous, and then it makes everybody very angry. Once in a while you really have a bad incident, and we have to take action about it. You have to react. Either punishment must follow according to the law, or at least stern disapproval must be expressed, and the leaders must take a stand. But these are things which you have to judge, and you have to decide what is the best way to handle it, because sometimes if there's a small incident and you overreact, and everybody gets het up overnight because you saw somebody made a foolish post, I think is not really the wisest way to handle it. You have to see it in perspective. It's wrong, I condemn it, don't do it again. Let's move on. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't, you have to go further, but you have to judge it, and you cannot have maximum response every time. In the West, they got a movement called wokeness, where you are super sensitive about other people, and where you are super sensitive about other people's issues, and you become hypersensitive when other people somehow or other say things or mention things or refer to you without the respect which you or your super subgroup feel you are entitled to. And it leads to very extreme attitudes and social norms, particularly in some academic institutions, universities. You talk about safe spaces, you talk about appropriate pronouns, you talk about how you must, I'm about to say something which may be offensive to you. If you don't want to hear it, perhaps you'd like to leave now. And life becomes very burdensome. And I don't think we want to go in that direction. It does not make us a more resilient, cohesive society with a strong sense of solidarity. We must be more robust.
But PM, as small as the world has become and as interconnected the youth are, I mean, and I don't mean just people who are in their 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
I mean people who are under the age
Yeah.
of 40 or 50 and below, young enough, their attitudes get shaped.
Yes.
They get influenced.
Yes.
Are we at risk of that as well?
Yes, we are. We are open to outside influence. You don't want to be completely closed and ignore the rest of the world. But when a new fad sweeps the world, we should look at it cautiously and not be. I think we can afford to wait a while before we decide whether it's wise or not. But these things happen. I mean, it is this. I talk about wokeness, but it's also religious norms. It's also cultural norms, sexual norms too, family norms. We are all part of one global humanity, and yet we are a Singapore nation. And you will always be both of this, and I want to keep this Singapore nation cohesive, united, open, but not dissolved and just melted away. And that, I think, for Singapore for the long term, that is one of our key nation building tasks.
All right, so now moving on to good politics.
Yes.
You have led PAP during a time where there was growing appetite for opposition and diversity. You have mentioned this several times,
Yeah.
where the majority of people, they want PAP to
Yes.
rule, but
Yeah.
they still want the opposition to keep the government in check.
Yes.
So question is, people have questioned PAP's dominance over the years. How do you view that perception that people have? And also, has PAP changed over the years?
We certainly have changed. We've changed generationally, new leaders. We've changed in terms of the policies, updated regularly. We've changed in terms of the way we pitch the policies. How do we reach out? How do we put it out? How do we explain it? It's not just going onto social media and TikTok, but the way in which you engage people, discuss it with them, modify your views as you go along, and then finally present in an interactive way and get people to buy in. I think we've changed a lot over the years, and it's for the better. Certain things have not changed. Our commitment to Singapore has not changed. Our determination to maintain high standards of integrity and competence, it has not changed. Our commitment to serve Singaporeans is the same. Our intention to keep on providing a high quality government for Singapore, I think that must always be there. And Singapore depends on that, because if the PAP didn't do that, I think any other political party would be hard put to do the same thing. It's a reality. As for dominance, I would say the dominance is, I wouldn't say dominance, I would say this is the mandate of the people. They want the Singapore government to govern. We are governing the way we think works best for Singapore. And works best for Singapore for this generation. Because Mr. Lee Kuan Yew governed in a certain way. It worked for his generation. It wrought miracles, practically. But it was his generation and him. Mr. Goh Chok Tong did it his way for a younger generation, different from Mr. Lee. And I have tried to do it my way, different from both Mr. Lee and Mr. Goh. If I had tried to do it their way, either one, I think I would have failed. But beyond that, I don't know what you mean by dominance, because we set the agenda, we implement the policies, we make it work, but in Parliament there are ample alternative voices. The opposition has a dozen MPs, there are NMPs as well. All views are aired, and questions are asked without any restraint, answered, debated. People write all sorts of pieces on op-eds online, on CNA Insider, or in newspapers. That's the way a vibrant system works. So, yes, we have the people's support. Finally, the people want us to govern. If you call that dominance, well, that's we are dominant. But if you say we are a government with a strong mandate in a system where many other views are heard and not suppressed, I think that's a more accurate description of where we are.
PM, you spoke about how in Parliament there are now more alternative voices, and you have said before that the PAP is in this unique quandary where people want you to be the government, but yet they want the opposition to do well enough so they can come into Parliament to check you.
Yes.
And you mentioned how that could have an impact on maybe having to spend more energies on politics rather than policies. So during your time as Prime Minister, have you seen, how has this affected maybe the debates in Parliament, and have you seen actual impact on?
Well, I think there is no doubt that we are spending more time on politics than before. I think we still spend more time on policies, but that we do feel in the PAP that we have to spend the time on politics because you must win the politics. Otherwise, the policies cannot run. That's the way the system works. Parliament with more opposition, more active opposition, I think the debates have become more intense. From the point of view of quality of debate, if you are watching it as a television debate, I would have to say the quality has improved because there are more opposition MPs. They come with prepared positions. They have coordinated amongst themselves. They make their pitch. The government replies. From the point of view of government, has it improved people's understanding of issues and enlightened issues and enlightened the public? The answer is mixed. Because once in a while you have a non-contentious issue. For example, if there's a nasty accident and you discuss what should we do more to prevent accidents from happening, our heart bleeds for the victims. Or you've got a problem which is completely non-political, such as you've got so many internet scams, how do I protect people better from being cheated on the internet, old folks, vulnerable people. I think there it's not so hard to have a constructive debate, and the opposition will chip in ideas, and sometimes if you close your eyes, it sounds quite, could have been made by somebody white and white. But many other important issues are inherently carry some political color to it. And it's very difficult to take that political color out and have a debate which is solely focused on improving the policy and making things better or clearing it out. If you ask why healthcare is not more affordable, if you ask why housing doesn't come faster and should we build more houses or not, if you ask education, should we have more university places or fewer, should we teach things in school one way or the other, the temptation to make this an occasion to score points against the government, the incentive to do it, not the temptation, but the incentive to do it, is very strong. Because if you help the government to govern better, and the government says, thank you, I will do it, and the result is better, you're making it harder for yourself to get elected the next time. And you want to get elected, right? So the premium is on showing up what the shortcomings are. Why is it you don't do it the other way? I have a good idea. Here's how you can make it cheaper, better, faster. And then, TV-wise, it's still a good debate. But enlightenment-wise and productivity-wise, I'm not so sure. You may have to go through it because some of these arguments will be out there, the views will be there, you have to deal with them, you have to rebut it. But I think if we spend more and more time thinking up clever arguments and rebutting clever arguments, we will have less and less time thinking up good ideas and implementing good ideas. And if the trend is that I want more and more check and balance and more alternative voices, and still I want a PAP government, you are inevitably going to weaken the government in terms of the energy it has to work on policies that benefit Singaporeans. in terms of its ability to assemble a team which is up to scratch to deliver a high-quality government to Singaporeans. And I think the quality of government will go down, our policies will be less creative, the results will generate fewer benefits for Singaporeans, and at some point the political system will malfunction. It is a risk.
Is there a magic number or some proportion in Parliament by which, it will tip over?
There is no magic number, but we have to push very hard against this. That there is a trend, I think that's the way politics works. When I came in, I was elected in 1984, there were two opposition MPs in Parliament elected that year, Jeyaretnam and Chiam See Tong. And we thought that it was quite a major setback, because up to then there was just Mr. Jeyaretnam who had been appointed in a by-election. And we thought this was a major setback, and we would have to work very hard to deal with this. Well, we were able to hold the line, and after Mr. Goh Chok Tong took over, he had a general election in 1991, and you may or may not remember, but in that general election, the opposition contested very few of the seats. And Mr. Chiam See Tong very proudly declared that this was his by-election strategy, meaning that there's no danger of my taking over the government. You've got a PAP government, now please vote for me. Quite safe, nothing will happen. I won't be your government, you can vote for me. Yes. And he got elected, but that was then. It's an amazing approach. When I became PM in 2006, I called a general election for the first time. Even then, there was a minority of seats which were contested. Most of the seats were not contested, and the PAP formed the government on nomination day. This last election, all the seats were contested. Now the opposition says, we want 1/3. Check the PAP. So one newspaper columnist said they want 1/2. They stoutly denied that. Strong rebuttal, indignation. We don't want 1/2. Why so indignant? Shock and awe. Because they want people to feel it's quite safe, just move a little bit further along the slope, no harm, nothing will happen. Life will carry on, PAP will look after you. We will be even stronger checking the PAP and speaking up for you. Marvelous. Have your cake and eat it twice. But is it so safe? So you ask me what is a safe number, I say there's no safe number. This is the way the system will work everywhere if you have elections. You must have elections, because without that, we'll have other very serious problems in the politics. And we have to make this work as best we can. The way it has worked in Singapore is quite special and doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Democracy or non-democracy. There is consent, there is mandate, and there is restraint, and there is sustainable continuity. It's remarkable. You leave it, you will never come back. People ask, how does politics work in Singapore? So I explain to them. They look at me, they think I'm a man from Mars. They cannot imagine anything like this happening in their country. Foreign delegates visit the NTUC. NTUC talk to them about tripartite relationship, how they work with the government, with the people, with the employers, how we go for win-win, how we negotiate, protect workers' rights, but we are not at loggerheads with one another, confrontational. They listen to NTUC. They tell the NTUC, when my government behaves like your government, I will behave like you. So there you are. You get there, you can't come back. We are here. Keep it like this for as long as you can. It delivers outstanding results, whether security, whether economy, whether housing, education, healthcare, everything, to make this government work like this, to have this kind of standard of living in Singapore, to be able to to have a leader who can say, I have the support of the people, I've done my best for the people, and I think I have delivered. I think that's a very rare privilege which Singaporeans have. Keep it.
But PM, you can imagine maybe the opposition parties will say that this is your pitch, and of course they are hoping that probably hoping that this doesn't remain forever.
Yes, of course. They have to. That's the way the system is set up, and that must be their mission.
So do you think in your lifetime you might see a non-PAP government in power one day?
I will try, I hope not. We will try very hard as the PAP to make sure that we continue to win the people's mandate and to hold the position in a different way with a different generation. But if that happens, that means we have failed to do that. It can happen.
PM, you speak about the mandate, and ultimately the power lies in the hands of the electorate at the ballot box on election day. Are you concerned at all as we face the prospect of another general election, which must be called not too far, before November next year? Are you concerned at all about an erosion of support for the PAP?
You mean support people want us to be government, or support people will actually put the cross on the right spot on the ballot paper?
Putting that cross on the ballot paper.
We will see when the boxes are open. You never know. In 2015, the results were better than we expected. In 2020, the results were not as high as we hoped. So you never know. We will try our best to deserve that cross against the right logo, and we'll fight hard to persuade people to do that. But it can go to the wrong place, and the earlier question, 20 years, it can happen. It can happen because the PAP has let the people down then, and the opposition has become stronger and better and offers a better alternative. Well, in that situation, I say, I'm sad for the PAP, but for Singapore, go for the opposition, vote the better team, take care of the country. So be it. It has to be. And may you succeed, may you take the country forward. But it can also be that the political system has malfunctioned, because I described to you how it can go wrong. And therefore the government was less able to govern well, and therefore lost the support. And there's nobody else there who is going to be able to do better. And then I think the country is in real trouble. And that can easily happen.
Just adding on, how can we actually foster more interest in politics amongst our youth? I have to also say that some of our ministers' social media game is strong. It's getting better with time actually, and they're giving a tough fight for the youngsters. But how do you think we can increase youngsters' interest in politics?
Well, I think the social media is one way of doing it. I went onto Facebook, Instagram, then came TikTok. I think TikTok will be for the next generation of ministers. And at least it interests the people in the personalities, maybe a little bit in the content, and hopefully encourages them to think more deeply about what this is about. But frankly, you cannot convey the essence of being a Singaporean in a social media, via social media. Even with a television channel and a newspaper and acres of newsprint, you work very hard to get that sense across. Because it's not just the message across, but the interaction and the participation and the life experience and engagement which makes it happen. So to make the younger generation interested, I think if you have a crisis, people pay attention. During COVID, my posts were always very well followed because people were anxious and wanted to know what was happening. And if I had something new to tell them or to update them, they wanted to know. I'm sure there will be other tensions which will come and people will pay attention. During Israel-Gaza, I think news consumption went up. During Ukraine, and in early stages, news consumption went up. probably now tapered off. But hopefully people read all this and don't just treat it as entertainment. I finish watching flick, and then tomorrow I flick new stuff. But something sinks home and you think about it and contemplate it and conclude what does it mean to be a Singaporean. And I think that is a lot of work. We try to do it in school, we try to do it through national service. I hope parents try to do it with their children. But we do it every year. National Day, we make a big thing of the parade because it's an opportunity for people to take pride in the country. These things mean something and we need to do more of them.
PM, what about not just to pay attention to politics, but your advice for young people, on taking the next step and to join politics like you have?
If you are idealistic, if you want to do something, if you want to make a contribution, please seriously consider that. It's very hard, it's harder now. I think to join politics maybe not so hard because it's may not be in the limelight. To decide to be a candidate is harder because then you are exposed and your family also has their privacy impinged upon, and family time. I mean, if all your weekends are spent in the constituency, when are you going to take your kid to the zoo?
Yeah.
So that's a consideration. But also social media and the online discourse, which can sometimes be very vicious, is a real consideration. And the families say, why do I want to put myself and my kids through this? Even if you're willing to sacrifice, what about, you must think about us. So that is a real problem, and that's why we disapprove strongly of the false and vicious stuff which comes out on the internet. We haven't got a entirely good solution yet, but it is a serious problem. And it is particularly a problem looking for people coming in to take office, to be PALSECs, MOSs, ministers. No, what for? And yet you need high quality PALSECs, MOSs, ministers, MPs, grassroots activists.
So PM, having gone through all this, would you encourage your children to join politics, like any of your children?
If they had an interest, if they were not my children, and if they had an interest, yes. If they are my children, the hurdle is higher. So far, none of them have showed any interest. My grandchildren are much too young.
Okay. Thanks, PM.
When you talk about social media, nice segue to our next question. You are possibly our original social media influencer.
No, a very small time.
But how has the platform, helped you in terms of connecting, making a difference of connecting with the people?
You reach a different audience. People who follow my posts, like my pictures, know when I jalan-jalan, may not read my speeches or listen to my rallies. But it's an audience, and then when I post something else, hopefully it will turn up on their feed and they may take notice and maybe read it. It's somewhat transferable, but I post jalan-jalan, the response is very good. Tomorrow I post a meeting with so-and-so, very important visitor. It's not the same. But that's the way it is.
Okay, and PM, after you become senior minister, do you already know what you might be doing in cabinet? Have you discussed this with DPM Lawrence Wong?
Well, I have talked to him. I said, I will be here to do my best to help you to succeed. You have to be your own person. You have to make the decisions. You have to lead in your own way, persuade people in your own way, but I will give you the benefit of my experience and my views. But you have to set the tone. You have to carry the decisions.
Are there areas that you think you can contribute more in, like some of our previous SMs, they have maybe dealt with a lot of foreign policy issues or some of the tricky issues between Singapore and Malaysia?
Well, I hope that my the people I know, the network of leaders I've met and who know me will still be there for some time. They're getting old too and getting on. For example, President Jokowi is completing his term this year, and many of the leaders I've known, like Angela Merkel and Tony Blair, they retired some time ago. But to the extent that I have people who know me and whom I can talk to, I will certainly make use of that and engage them. Specific sensitive policies, that's up to the Prime Minister to decide. If he arrows me to do it, I will take the arrow.
PM, in a 1999 exchange between author and columnist William Safire and your late father, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who was then senior minister, your father was asked a question about you, about
Yes.
your role as deputy prime minister.
Yes.
Would you have even had that role if you had not been Mr. Lee's son? And in response, he said that if he were not my son, he would be prime minister. He said, I'll tell you honestly, I stopped him because he, Sen Lung, can run faster than any of the others. Well, you did become prime minister in 2004, and you will be remembered as a prime minister who was pragmatic. You'll be remembered for your resilience, for being tenacious. But what will you cherish about the privilege of having served as Singapore's third prime minister?
Well, I didn't try to run faster than everybody else. I tried to bring everybody to run with me. And I think we did have some success.
Thank you, PM.
Thank you, PM.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.